In today's complex environment, almost every major project, from mining to transmission lines, is contentious. Hi, my name is Allie Meeres.
And I'm Byng Giraud.
Welcome to Primary Risk, where each month we speak with the people behind the projects shaping our world.
We'll be hosting candid conversations and hearing from industry leaders, political figures, engineers, and project proponents. We'll be exploring the soft issue risks, challenges, and solutions, and behind-the-scenes stories of what it took to get these complex projects across the finish line. Or not.
What is a primary risk?
Primary risks are the first risk a project faces, and they're often to do with people.
Okay, and why are we starting this podcast?
We've seen projects across Canada, across British Columbia, even around the world. In modern OECD nations, the reality is if people aren't behind a project, if Indigenous communities aren't behind a project, if government isn't behind a project, then it's not going to go ahead, even before you get the first shovel in the ground.
I think the reason we started this podcast was because media, modern media, doesn't give enough voice to the people behind major projects. We oftentimes hear from NGO groups, we oftentimes hear from government, we hear these polished messages coming from audiences, but we don't actually hear from the movers, the shakers behind major projects, and we don't hear about the nitty-gritty details that it takes to get these projects done.
It's real people working on real projects, trying to make the world a better place. An engineer, project designer, mechanic, they're all trying to do their job. They're trying to do it well, and they're trying to make something that will improve our society. And it's often those voices, those workers, voices that aren't heard.
Yeah, and I think another reason that we're starting the podcast is because so much of what we do at Sedgwick we can't talk about. So our business is based in soft issue risk and what Byng has coined integrated corporate affairs. And that basically means that a lot of our work is under NDA and we can't talk about what it is we do, but we know that the work we're doing is helping move forward these major projects in BC and beyond across Canada. And I think it'll help give light to some interesting clients, some interesting people that we know help influence these projects behind the scenes.
Yeah, I mean, exactly, Allie. Like, why did a bridge get built instead of a tunnel? Why was a mine approved or not approved? Why was a liquefied natural gas facility been under construction for 10 years that never reached the end? There's so many stories behind that. There's so much drama, frankly, that builds some of the biggest things in our society, some of the most important things in our society that people just really don't know anything about.
And we hope that the people listening to this podcast, so CEOs, engineers, builders, that they come on and they learn something. So they walk away from the podcast and think, hey, I didn't know that, or I'm going to approach the project that I'm working on a little bit differently next time with the knowledge that I gained from the Primary Risk podcast.
Even to hear their own stories, because those voices, again, aren't heard. So they hear their own stories. Maybe it's somebody like them on a different project and the problems they encountered and how they came with solutions or why those problems couldn't be overcome.
I think as a company and as a podcast, we really believe that there is a solution to every problem and that we don't live in this black and white world, that there really is a gray and there really is a middle where, both sides of the table can come together to make these projects move ahead, because we do as a society rely on the people that are building these projects. We don't think about it, but I think it's something like 80% of BC's economy is supported outside of the Lower Mainland. So, when you think about that in context, like, we really need these projects.
I say to my children, milk doesn't come from the store, it comes from a cow. And what I mean by that is things come from an origin point. So the notion that this microphone in front of me came from plastic products and metal products that somebody had to find, somebody had to get out of the ground, somebody had to manufacture them and turn them into a product that we can buy. And so much of that is lost, that those first people that had to basically find the resource before the product could even be made. So many things that we carry in our hands that we use every day, we've lost touch with where things come from.
Absolutely. What do you think is the craziest project that's happened in BC in the last 2 decades?
Well, there were some projects that were actually energy generating projects that were coal-based, which most people wouldn't tolerate today, but they were well underway before government suddenly changed their mind on the policy. And so those projects were shut down in the middle of a project. And while you can say I'm against coal-fired energy or not, that's not really what we're talking about here. What we're talking about is that something was in a process and was allowed to happen, and people were working and spending money, and then suddenly they were told to stop. There's also some mining projects in BC that they were discovered back in the 50s or 60s, and they're only now actually being constructed. And we hear people say, well, why was that approved? It was an overnight approval. Well, nothing in British Columbia that's a major project is overnight. These things take decades to get to fruition.
How do you think regulatory timelines can be sped up? Do you think it's possible? And what do you think government has to do to make that happen? We talk about it. We've been talking about it for 10 years.
I mean, it's not just government. What we mean, because the reason governments, I think, overdo the regulatory processes, they're searching for this holy grail of, what's a process that's going to make everybody happy? Well, listen, we live in a diverse democratic society, and no matter what you do, somebody's going to be on the other side of it. And that's frankly a healthy society. So government should probably stop looking for this holy grail and probably should just create fair and transparent and timely processes, because people can understand a yes and a no. The long maybe is a bad answer.
You're talking about something that I think resonates with all of our files, because we're oftentimes telling clients, you're never going to get the perfect solution, right? You're never going to get this piece of paper or this solution that has everything in it that you want. That's not the point. The point is to move something ahead, you have to make incremental steps. You have to have incremental solutions and
other people involved.
Yeah.
So maybe an Indigenous community wants you to move it over here or make it this tall, or maybe space it over a different period of time. Maybe the community is uncomfortable with something that's attached to the project and not the project itself. If you don't adapt, if you're not willing to compromise, not willing to move, that's one of the reasons your project won't succeed. You can't over-design. So it's both companies that have to be flexible and open to the fact that voices in the community are legitimate and need to be heard, but also governments realizing that you'll never satisfy all voices of the community. So what can we do to satisfy most of them and allow our society to have a proper economy?
Mm-hmm. Well, and the regulatory piece as well. I mean, we don't have to always invent things ourselves. There are other jurisdictions in the world, be it Europe, be it the States, who have regulatory timelines in place that are accelerated, where they have put policy instruments in place to push along these projects in a way that still is environmental and still is economical and still works with all stakeholders involved. But it's being done in other jurisdictions, and we seem to want to just invent it ourselves.
Yeah, and the world didn't come to an end, right? Because something was approved. The other part of this, which is often forgot, given we are focused much more these days on a green agenda, is many green projects are facing these same regulatory burdens. You want to build an extra station on an LRT line so you can get more people to work with less cars. That should be an urgent thing, given the climate crisis. If you have to take 10 years to approve a transit station, it doesn't sound like a crisis to me.
Well, and again, I'm not going to say this is just the government, because it's not, it's everyone, but it's like we forgot that we are running a society, right? And that we do have to move ahead with things. I think we're now, it's everyone needs to be 100% on board before we can actually do something.
Yeah, and that's not logical in a democratic and free society. There will be people opposed. That's why we have votes. Not everybody votes the same way. That's why we have public opinion. That's why we have participatory democracy. So governments need to sort of get out of their own way. Critical minerals is a classic example. Here we have a huge desire for Western nations and amongst our allies for security reasons, but also for green energy solutions. So we need the access to these critical minerals, whether it's lithium or copper or what have you. But the production time for a mine essentially nullifies that green objective. So, we're tying ourselves up in knots almost unnecessarily. We can't achieve the actual objectives of our society because we've created unintended rules that actually harm our ability to do things we might all agree we want to do, which is, for example, greening our society.
Absolutely. Please follow us to receive notifications of upcoming episodes wherever you get your podcast. And new episodes will be released monthly for Primary Risk. We're excited to announce our upcoming speakers, so make sure you follow us on LinkedIn. And until the next episode.